our next speaker. There's not much I can say about Larry that all of us don't already know. However, I do want to recall what for me is one of his greatest achievements that happened even before he took office. I'm talking about the joy and inspiration he provided to so many of us just by winning the May 2017 primary. We all remember what we felt like just 6 months before that primary. But Larry mobilized a broad coalition of Black, brown, and progressive organizations and voters who rallied to his call to transform the office of district attorney. His victory in May 2017 was the first concrete proof after the debacle of 2016 that resistance to the right-wing takeover of our country was not in any way futile, that progressives could organize. Indeed, we have organized like never before, and we have reversed what happened in 2016. Philly neighborhood networks and all of us at the meeting are still inspired by and acting on the power that Larry was the first to unleash. And we thank him so much for that and what he's achieved in the DA's office. And with that, Larry, you're on.
Thank you, Stan. That is actually way too kind, because the reality is that you got me there. Not you, Stan, but all of neighborhood networks got me there. And I wasn't so much unleashing the power of the people. I was surfing on the power of the people at their request. You know, movements have technicians. That's me. The movement is you and so many other groups and so many other people who are on the same page with you. So thank you for that. However, ironically, the first coffee cup I picked up happened to be this one, and I don't want you to miss it. It says, "I hate when I wake up in the morning and Donald Trump is president." Don't we all? Anyway, and that's where we were when we ran the first time, and that's where we are now, and the urgency remains. So I understand my topic must be confined to a reasonable period of about 10 minutes. I've already wasted maybe one of them, but that's okay. So I'm going to run a clock to make sure I don't go too far, and then I'm happy for any questions you may have. What was proposed to me was to explain how we in the DA's office are trying to address systemic racism in criminal justice, what we have attempted, how it's worked, and how we continue to work on it. You know, in a way, it's such a big topic that you almost can't wrap your arms around it in criminal justice. So I'm going to divide my talk into two things. One of them is all of the aspects of criminal justice that we're trying to make more fair, and by doing so cannot help, due to the incredible overlap between racial justice and criminal justice, cannot help but to improve the systemically racist situation that is and always has been criminal justice in the United States. But the second part is just to talk about something we're very, very proud of, which is recruitment and the office culture within the DA's office, because, oh my goodness, was it necessary to try to do something there in terms of getting at the systemic racism in the system. Let's not kid ourselves. DAs have power, and they have outsized power in the system. And when you vest all of that power in an insular group of people who are not reflective of the demographics of the city, the life experience, the diversity of the population in every way, then you're going to have trouble. And we have had trouble in Philly for decades. You know, when you base your culture of criminal justice on Frank Rizzo, and you let that define not only the Philadelphia Police Department and much of our politics, but the DA's office for decades, you're going to have a problem. So it was our task in many ways to start the dismantling of that. So let me go first directly to the reality of what we have done in terms of criminal justice reform that so directly affects systemic racism in the system and so massively overlaps. Perhaps the cornerstone of any progressive prosecutor's agenda is to reduce, hopefully eventually eliminate, the mass incarceration that has made ours the most incarcerated country in the world. What have we done? And by the way, please don't accept the slightly historic inaccuracy that somehow I'm the first. Oh no, indeed. Before me was Aramis Ayala and Kim Fox and all of these wonderful progressive prosecutors around the country. We sometimes get more attention than we deserve, to be honest. And we can go back before that and talk a little bit about Liz Holtzman, who in another era in many ways was a very important progressive prosecutor and paved the way for the rest of us. But I'm thrilled to be a part of that growing and burgeoning movement, even though I can't take credit for in any way founding it. So what have we done? Let me tick off about 10 things that I think go directly to racial justice. Mass incarceration. Well, the number of years that were generated in the Philadelphia criminal courts in the prior administration, when you take that number of years of future jail, future prison, and compare it to now, we have cut it in half. So let me say that again. If you look at how many years came out of the criminal courts a few years before we got there, and you compared it to a time period during this administration, we have cut it by 50%. Why does that matter? It matters because you can count the jail population today and it tells you a little bit, but not very much. Some of those people are there for the weekend. Some of those people are serving life sentences. Some of them are doing 10 years. And you cannot tell that from the mere population that's in prison and in jail. But if you look at how big the bill is, how big the deficit is, how many years are coming due in the future, and how many jails and prisons it takes to house those people, that's how you figure out, are we going in the right direction? Cut it in half. Let's look at mass supervision. This means probation and parole. In Philadelphia has been the most over-supervised city among the big ones. Pennsylvania is either first or second now in being the worst at having massive periods of supervision. That supervision is sometimes 15 times as long as the period of actual incarceration in a particular case. It's a problem. So what have we done there? By the same metric, which is future years of supervision, future years of probation and parole before to now, we've reduced it by 2/3, and we've done that in 3 years. If we look at bail, there have been massive efforts to try to get us where we want to go but can't go yet, which is towards a no cash bail system. The first thing that we did was we identified about 25 to 30 offenses where we thought ordinarily we should never ask for money bail, but historically there had been money bail. Judges were given low money bail for decades and decades, and the only people not getting out were the broke ones. Well, that didn't make any sense. So we created a presumption that for those categories of cases, they were non-serious, non-violent cases, we would not seek money bail. It had a very serious impact early in the administration. More recently, and to be very candid, with more controversy, during the pandemic, we have been trying to move to a very binary system, which is what no cash bail systems are, which is you either get out and it doesn't involve money, or you stay in and it doesn't involve money. No cash bail systems are systems where some people are detained pre-trial. The most famous of these is the District of Columbia, which has had the gold standard for 30 years. And in the District of Columbia, about 12% of the people who are arrested end up detained until trial. They're charged with often the most serious offenses, rapes, shootings, extremely serious stuff. And then 88% get out, but money is never involved. Well, we have been going in that direction recently. The problem we have is that the judiciary is not coming along. They really like their system of giving a whole bunch of amounts of cash bail that are somewhere in the middle. And of course, what that does is it's just fine for the wealthy. It's pretty okay for the middle class. It's great for really rich, really dangerous people, because no matter what they've done, they could pay their way out. But it's terrible for poor people in less serious cases. So we continue with that. Longer talk, but we continue on it. It's crucial to racial justice. Immigration. There was never a unit to deal with immigration issues in the DA's office until this administration. We have a unit now that does a number of things. It protects witnesses who may have difficult immigration situations and could face outsized consequences simply to coming forward as victims or coming forward as witnesses in cases. Many times they would be witnesses, helping victims who are US citizens. So, the notion that we would create a world, Donald Trump's world, where you should be afraid to go to court as a victim, or you should be afraid to go to court as a witness, is absurd. And the other thing that we have done is we focus specifically on defendants who have immigration consequences. And where we feel the immigration consequences are too dire, they're too outsized compared to the case, we consider them for equal but not identical treatment. So what I mean by that is if being convicted for offense A is going to jackpot you and get you deported, but being convicted for equally serious offense B, which is a different way to describe the same situation, will not have those immigration consequences. Where appropriate, we're going to look at it. Does that mean if we have a serial killer, we're worried about immigration consequences? Well, no, we're not. Ted Bundy can be deported. We're okay with that. But when we're talking about what we actually see all the time in the criminal justice system, you know, the retail theft, the driving under the influence of alcohol, the fight that may have these outsized immigration consequences for what are basically hardworking people who do not have documentation to be in the United States, we have a full-time unit that considers that for equity and fairness. It's an idea we took from Brooklyn. We thought it was a great idea, so we've done it. The death penalty. At this point, simply put, we have not pursued the death penalty in a single case. And when we took over the office, they were all in a red hot hurry to make sure that they had given notice of an intent to pursue the death penalty. I'll let you figure out the politics behind that. But in their red hot haste to declare the death penalty for cases they would not handle, but I would, they left me holding 4 where there had been notification of an intent to pursue the death penalty. We did not pursue the death penalty in any of those 4 cases. And frankly, we did not care about the politics because individually considered in those cases, it was the right thing to do. Exonerations were basically unheard of in the prior administrations. We have 17. Once again, coming back to the issue of racial justice, every one of those defendants except one is Black or brown in those cases. And that is not surprising because it is always the marginalized people, the least resourced people who are most vulnerable in 14 different ways to being wrongfully convicted either by dirty tactics or, despite their actual innocence. And the vast majority of these 17 are actually innocent. They're always the most vulnerable because they're the outsiders, because they are marginalized, because they don't have the money, because they don't have the access and the power. They're the ones most vulnerable to it. Our unit that pursues those cases has gone in the prior administration from basically 2.5 people to over 10. And they do amazing work and will continue to do it. As I sit here right now, I'm aware of at least 6 or 7 under serious consideration now. Please understand, we do not willy-nilly pursue the exoneration of people. The vast majority of these cases we get are either ones where guilt is apparent or there is really no way to get behind the information and evidence. There's no basis for clarity on either conduct that lacked integrity in the conviction or innocence. So we are very careful about this, and every decision we have made has been endorsed by one judge or another. But we're serious about this. Our obligation to do the right thing going forward does not somehow excuse us from doing the right thing going backward. If we look at juvenile justice, and please, Stan, if I'm going over, my timer didn't work, it appears. So if I'm going over, will you please let me know? Okay, I'm at 10 minutes. I'll finish it up. If you look at juvenile justice, both in our dealings with juvenile lifers, and Philadelphia was the international epicenter of juvenile lifers. We had more juvenile lifers in Philly than in any other city or state in the United States, and other countries don't do this. They don't do it. We have almost finished that entire caseload, and there has been an academic study that shows a clear difference between the policies of this administration and the prior administration. On average, it looks like about 10-year shorter sentences for the juvenile lifers who, consistent with the Supreme Court's requirements, have been resentenced. The very, very good news there, and I mean globally good news when you talk about criminal justice, is the rate of recidivism among those juvenile lifers who have been released, these supposed monsters who had to either die in jail or die by execution. The rate of recidivism, the rate at which they have committed new crimes, is so low that it is probably less than an average sample of the US population. You're in more danger walking out the front door and walking down the street among your neighbors and strangers than you are in a room full of juvenile lifers who've come out of jail. And the insight behind that, without going on and on, is very fundamental to the cracked foundation of our criminal justice system. When you look at police accountability, this administration, simply put, has been far more willing than any prior administration in Philly to hold police accountable. We have also been careful and fair and even-handed in doing that. But a couple of highlights, you have a police inspector charged with sexually assaulting 3 different female police officers, a police inspector who was given a pass by prior administrations and by internal affairs. Well, he's charged with those crimes. We have a different homicide detective, a different individual who was extracting sexually what he wanted from a whole group of informants in homicide cases by either threatening to shift blame for the homicide to the informant or if they did what he wanted by giving them reward money they didn't deserve. He is sitting in jail as we speak, awaiting trial, and he should be. We have 2 police officers who, while on duty and in uniform, killed a civilian and are charged with murder. Now, understand, we have also cleared a ton of police officers, but in those 2 instances, the men killed were unarmed when they were shot to death. In those 2 instances, after a very careful and searching grand jury determination, those grand juries came back with those charges. And in those 2 cases, unlike in the Lynn Abraham administration, when only once in 19 years did they attempt anything like it, these 2 cases are headed for trial. The one Lynn Abraham had was thrown out at the preliminary level very early and twice. And then that administration just shrugged its shoulders and said, oh, well, and did the political thing. So it is a sea change. Simply put, it is a sea change in those terms. And now I have failed to tell you the joys of what we've done in terms of recruitment, but maybe I'll sneak that in during the questions.
Thank you so much, D. Krasner. Well, first I want to say I really appreciate hearing all of the accomplishments you've been able to achieve in your first term, especially as a person who's both been impacted and have seen the impact of the criminal legal system in our police state. So really, really appreciate that, which goes to this first question, which is you've been able to do so much in your first term, but how likely is it that, you know, in 8 years or whatever the case may be, the next DA would be able, like, what is the possibility that the next DA would be able to overturn or change some of the policies that you had put in place and able to achieve these successes?
Well, thank you for that question, Mr. Paul. So here's the great news. The great news is that the progressive prosecutors across the country have better odds of winning than the Democratic Party. And the Democratic Party is doing okay. But if you actually look at the number of progressive candidates who ran in the last election cycle, it was in the 20s, and only 4 of them lost. The biggest criminal justice jurisdiction in the United States was won by the progressive candidate. That's Los Angeles. And the candidate was George Gascon. That is amazing. The biggest criminal justice jurisdiction in the United States, a jurisdiction that generates a ton of future years of incarceration, is now, in the hands of a progressive prosecutor. And I could go on and on. Kim Foxx has been reelected. Our wonderful friend in Baltimore, Marilyn Mosby, has been reelected. Rachel Rollins has been elected. So what I'm saying is the good news is I think the weather is with us. And I think that we're not only going to continue to be reelected, of course, it'll take all of your help and maybe a little of your money, but we are going to, I think we're going to see more and more jurisdictions. Right now, 10% of the United States is, let me try again, 10% of the US population lives in a jurisdiction where the prosecutor is a progressive, believe it or not. And that's partly because progressives are winning in such enormous jurisdictions that are such drivers of mass incarceration. So let me not avoid your question. Your question is, could that be reversed? Answer, yes, it absolutely could. In the same way we saw Barack Obama followed by Donald Trump and every horror that has come, it could happen again. And that's why we have to be so diligent and vigilant. We all know that we are looking at minority rule. If we're not able to stop these crazy right-wing Republicans from doing what they do best, which is suppressing votes and changing all the rules, so that you got to not only win as a Democrat, you got to win big and you got to win everywhere. And, they are the kings of gerrymandering. They better be, because they wouldn't exist if it weren't for the fact that they're so good at that. So it is possible it could be reversed. But let me just say this. I know my time is limited as a DA here. This is really the only thing that I want to do. It is my hope to get a little further down the road, and then we turn this over to the next generation. Some of the people that we're hiring right now, and again, in a minute, maybe I get a chance to talk about that. We turn it over to them because to my mind, this is the most serious civil rights movement of our time. I mean, let me not say it's the most, that's wrong, but it is among the most. It's a real deal. It's important. And it's an arc that is, in my mind, at least maybe 30 years from when Michelle Alexander wrote The New Jim Crow, which was 10 years ago. We got like 20 years to go before we can really look around and say, hey, that felt hard, but I guess it was easy, right? Which is how all movements feel when they finally succeed. We need to make a lot more progress. We need to be impatient about it. We need to be vigilant with winning these elections. And if we do that, this will not be reversed because it's sinking in at the level of culture.
Larry, thanks so much for all of that. We only have another minute. And if you can squeeze in an answer to this question in a minute or a minute and a half,
Okay.
that would be a tremendous achievement. So the question is, do you think it is from Stan Horowitz, is it a realistic goal for the Office of the DA to tackle violent crime reduction in light of its many roots, such as poverty, lack of education access, and other such ills?
Great question. It is absolutely our obligation to try. And it is absolutely our obligation to point out that putting the pandemic issues aside, which are truly important, but putting them aside, the way we got here was decades of a different philosophy around gun violence that got us here. You know, the whole philosophy was shred the social safety net. That's all some excuse. And then let's just get a million cops. I mean, that was really the theory. Well, look at the jurisdictions with the most police officers. No disrespect to Philly cops. A lot of them are my friends and I respect them. Chicago and Philly, chronically violent cities. So it's obvious that the old philosophy didn't protect us. We should be going with the new philosophy. We are pushing that at every turn and in every different way. Some of that is communications, bully pulpit, but a lot of it is more specific than that. It's coming up with more intelligent programs and things we can do to push in that direction.
Fabulous. You actually did finish in time. Thank you so much. we all know a little bit more than we already knew about the great work you're doing in the DA's office. So I'm turning it back to Gloria right now.
All right. Thank you all.
Thank you, Larry, for giving us hope in a bleak, bleak time.